Why doesn't paganism resist Christianity? Christianity keeps spreading over the earth. Its buildings and symbols are rising everywhere, covering the land with the forms of monotheism. These symbols appear silently, without discussion, as if they're automatically accepted by everyone. A whole village or city district seems to rejoice in living next to a cross, and heaven forbid anyone dares to touch it, for it is holy. Crosses are aggressively placed near sacred springs, with plaques telling what is now blessed and what is forbidden. Crosses are carved into ancient stones. The list of such acts could go on and on. So why doesn't the pagan world openly resist this? Why not at least put up as many of our own symbols in return? Why not defend those that have been taken? Have the pagans really surrendered to the young monotheism and admitted defeat? Or do the old gods still have some methods, subtle for now, invisible to the masses, that will one day turn the world back to honor and dignity? And what can each of us do today if we refuse to see ourselves as servants of this God to help bring that moment closer? Thank you, that's a great question. It's a bit long, but good. Let's try to unravel it and start at the end. What should we do? Maybe just be. There's no need to put symbols everywhere just to prove to yourself and others that you're not a servant of God. Live not as a servant, but as a free person. Rely only on yourself. If you have made a promise, keep it. If you have decided to bring another human being into the world, that is, to have a child, remember that it has no one and will have no one but you, at least for a while. The moment you put your hope in the state, you become its servant. The moment you rely on grandparents, you are a servant. Because you have shifted your responsibility to someone else. If you think the school will educate your child for you, and you don't have to worry about it, you have acted like a servant. Start small, begin with yourself, with your own consciousness, and perhaps neither you nor your children will become servants. Explain everything to them yourself without waiting for someone else to do it. Help them understand what's going on in the world, but to explain it properly, you first need to understand it properly yourself. As for the position of paganism, the old gods, and Christianity, the processes that take place in our world have to take place within this system. And humans are participants in these processes. The role they choose to play is up to them. They can stand with the pagans or they can stand with the Christians. It is easier to stand with the Christians. Why is that? Firstly, because they are the majority. Secondly, because they have the support of the system. And behind every religion, there is always a foundation. For monotheistic religions, that foundation is the state, supported by a vast number of social institutions. While behind the pagans, there is nothing but their own honor, their own will, and their own faith. First and foremost, their faith in themselves. Pagans are in the minority. In this case, in this situation, yes, of course they are in the minority. But this would probably not be such a big problem if we could say that every pagan really had all those qualities we have just mentioned: honor, dignity, will, loyalty, the ability to rely only on oneself, never to sell one's honor, never to sell one's time for money, and to take responsibility for one's children. And all this, as a set, as an indicator of paganism, not definitive, of course, but one of them, is very often not fulfilled by the great number of people who today call themselves pagans or claim to belong to some tradition, Scandinavian, Celtic, or Slavic. These necessary conditions are simply not met, and yet they call themselves pagans. Interaction with the old gods is only possible under the condition of purity of one's own consciousness. If there is a Judeo-Christian matrix in the consciousness that makes a person dependent on the state, lying, cheating, agreeing to things, then no pagan consciousness of any pagan god will enter there. It will simply turn away in disgust. And you can call yourself a pagan all you want, but if you act just like a Christian, how are you different? Is it only the name that distinguishes you? In fact, there are very few true pagans, but many who call themselves that. And your question is understandable. In fact, the internet is full of information about paganism as a system, as a need to revive the old tradition. It is clear that official state and social policies do not support this tradition, in the sense that they do not help it. But for certain reasons they cannot forbid it either, yet they are not obliged to help. Because the very principle of statehood is not built on a pagan paradigm, it is built on a monotheistic paradigm, and it is clear that they will always support that force that allows them to preserve power. This is clear and logical. One should not even expect anything else from them. The mistake of many pagans is that they try to get recognition from the state. From which state do you seek recognition? From a state born of a monotheistic religion. People, come to your senses. What are you doing? But that understanding just isn't there. None of it fits together. Look at the origins of both monotheism and modern statehood. Don't you see that they come from the same root? And yet you now turn to the state with a request. Give me your recognition? When your counterpart, a religion, sees paganism as a thorn in its side and fights it relentlessly, you go to the ally of your enemy and say, "Help me." And it replies, "Well, I'd be happy to help you. I just happen to have a few free prison cells. So, come on in." This is folly, utter folly, born purely out of naivety. And this naivety stems from the fact that people fail to grasp the origins. They do not understand what is happening now. They strive to separate the state from the church, yet they refuse to be separated themselves. Because if one ceases to exist, so does the other, don't you see? Let me give you an example to illustrate this. It happened not long ago, this summer. An unprecedented and outrageous case. Probably nothing like it has ever happened before. Moreover, it is such a vivid, very telling case, which clearly demonstrated to everyone that paganism, as a tradition, as a system, as an order, as a formation of people, will not exist. If it exists in your head, then it exists there. But to look for another dozen heads to form a coven is utter nonsense. So the story is this. And this story happened among followers of the Scandinavian tradition, which in my opinion is even more terrible and shameful, because I seem to have nothing to do with it. But when I came across this story, I felt devastated. A follower of the Norse tradition, took another follower of the same tradition to court under the blasphemy law. It would be one thing if the feelings of someone who genuinely believed in the Scandinavian gods had been offended. But instead, this follower of the Norse tradition claimed to be offended on behalf of Christians and took a pagan woman to court, a state institution, over a public post, over a picture on the internet. And the picture was completely innocent, the god Thor smashing Christian churches with his hammer. It seemed to be related to a role-playing game about Viking raids on Novgorod. There is its own story behind it, but that is not the point. The picture was there, and that person was offended. So offended that he took it to court. It turned out that in everyday life he is just a regular lawyer, a sort of pagan attorney. And against this woman, the administrator of this public site, a criminal case was opened, and now there is a trial, and I follow it from time to time, because, shall we say, it is in the scope of my interests. And she, a mother of 2 children, an ordinary woman from Siberia, is facing a real prison sentence of no less than 2 years. And now, colleagues, think about it. If we use the state as an arbiter to resolve such matters, if we use an instrument that was invented by that very state to destroy those very pagans, to protect its monotheistic religion, then we are essentially no different from that religion. And it does not matter what we call ourselves if we use these monotheistic methods. Such a shameful story has probably never happened before. And it seems to be a reflection of our reality. And will the gods interact with the consciousness of people who allow themselves to do this to their own people? Who do not challenge them to an honest duel? Who do not talk to them face to face, as is proper, without involving outsiders? Who do not swear an oath on Ula's ring? Who do not come to an agreement on the matter, but go into a state institution which, of course, will support the existing monotheistic religion, and of course, will support state policy. It will not support pagans. To say that this is a disgrace is to say nothing, and it no longer matters that everyone has boycotted this person, including European pagans who have said that we simply do not want to know the name of this so-called Gothi. This is a precedent that erases everything we've been doing and gathering here, piece by piece, all wiped away in one go. And this concerns the question of the power of the old gods. Tell me, colleagues, through whom will they manifest this power? Who among those who call themselves pagans can truly swear that they possess all the qualities of the old gods, and that they will not use the methods of Judeo-Christianity, that they will not use the methods of the monotheistic religions, be it Islam or Judaism, that they will live by the commandments of the old gods, whether it is to their advantage or not? Perhaps that is why things are happening the way they are. And until something switches in the consciousness of a person, until something changes in the matrix of the perception of reality, in the understanding of what is happening, well, maybe what is happening is actually right, don't you think? Put yourself in the place of a god and tell me, would you want to contact, interact with such a human consciousness? Even if it were your own consciousness, simply worn out and distorted to the point of being completely unrecognizable and fragmented on all sides. To sum up, I will say this: everything will happen in its own time. Awareness does not come immediately. I mean, it comes, but not in all minds at the same time. In each mind it happens in its own time. In yours today, in your neighbor's tomorrow, in your relatives the day after, but it will happen inevitably. But what kind of consciousness will reside in the minds of your children now depends entirely on you. And that may be the only thing you can really do, to remove the Judeo-Christian matrix from your own consciousness, and never to act in such a way, and to teach your children not to do so. And perhaps, in 2 or 3 generations, the process will finally move away from this dead point. At least there will be no more traitors in your blood. Remember this story of a pagan suing a pagan. Remember it well. Remember it firmly. Let it become for you a symbol of the endless deceitfulness of the human mind. Which wants to reconcile and agree that completely different gods will live on their land. A person has no right to agree to this because the land does not belong to him. And if he agrees to this, he betrays his gods, and if he betrays his gods, he can hardly expect their support. The history of the introduction of Christianity into our lands, not just ours but all the lands where it was introduced, is a history of endless and profound betrayal. One day we will realize this. One day we may even correct it, perhaps we ourselves. I suggest to you, colleagues, to do the little you can. And if each of you acts without looking at your neighbor, the result will be more fruitful than waiting for a coven to gather. It will never gather. But at some point, if everyone does what they should, you will see that suddenly it's not just that there are many of you, but that you are all together, side by side. This will happen naturally, of its own accord. I sincerely hope that you live long enough to see this, and if you don't, then tell your children that this is what it is worth living for.